She woke before sunrise, the room still quiet, the air heavy with the smell of rain that had fallen during the night. Her hand rested on her belly, moving in slow circles, a habit that brought her calm. The baby kicked softly, as if answering her touch. This small movement was the only thing that felt certain in her life now. Everything else felt fragile, like glass waiting to crack. Her home was simple. The furniture was old but clean, chosen more for comfort than style. There were no signs of wealth, no expensive decorations, no reminders of power or status. This was a life she had always known. She believed in honest work, quiet days, and the promise that love would be enough. She had married for love, trusting that loyalty and patience would carry them through anything. Her father had raised her the same way. He was a quiet man who spoke little, but observed everything. He wore the same plain clothes year after year, and drove an old car that made strange sounds when it started. He never talked about money, never showed interest in luxury, and never gave advice unless asked. To her, he was simply a hard-working man who valued peace and dignity. She never imagined there was anything more to him. The call came late at night, when the city outside was almost asleep. She answered with a tired voice, thinking it might be a wrong number. The words on the other end froze her body. Her father was gone. No long explanation. No dramatic details. Just a calm voice delivering the kind of news that changes a person forever. She did not scream. She did not cry right away. She sat on the edge of the bed, holding the phone, listening to silence after the call ended. Her husband slept beside her, turned away, breathing evenly. She looked at him, hoping for comfort, but he did not wake. She lay back down, staring at the ceiling, feeling a hollow space open inside her chest. The funeral was small. Just a few people stood by the grave, their faces serious but distant. Her father had no close friends, no large family, no crowd of mourners. It felt strange that a man who had shaped her entire life could leave the world so quietly. She stood there, dressed in black, holding her belly, whispering goodbye only she could hear. Her husband stayed beside her during the service, but his presence felt empty. He checked his phone often, his eyes restless, his patience thin. When she reached for his hand, he offered it without warmth. She told herself he was grieving in his own way. She wanted to believe that. After the funeral, life returned to its slow routine, but something felt wrong. Her husband became distant in a way she could no longer ignore. He came home late, avoided conversations, and grew irritated over small things. When she spoke about the baby, his responses were short and cold. The joy she expected him to feel never appeared. She blamed herself at first. She thought maybe the stress of pregnancy was making her sensitive. Maybe grief had clouded her judgment. She tried harder to please him, cooking his favorite meals, keeping the house quiet, avoiding questions. Still, the distance grew. Her nights became restless. She would lie awake, listening for the sound of his footsteps, wondering where he had been. Sometimes he smelled like unfamiliar perfume. Other times he would shower immediately after coming home, avoiding her eyes. A quiet fear settled in her heart, but she pushed it away. She wanted stability for her child, even if it meant ignoring her own doubts. One afternoon, while folding laundry, she felt dizzy and had to sit down. Her hand went to her belly again, checking for movement. The baby kicked, strong and steady. That small reassurance gave her strength. She promised herself she would protect this life no matter what. Days later, a letter arrived addressed to her father. The envelope was heavy, the paper thick, unlike anything she had seen before. She stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside were formal words she barely understood, speaking of legal matters and future meetings. There was no clear explanation, only a request for her presence in an office in the city. She placed the letter on the table and waited for her husband to come home. When she showed it to him, he glanced at it briefly and shrugged. He said it was probably a mistake or some old business issue. His lack of interest surprised her. She had expected curiosity or concern. Instead, he seemed almost annoyed. That night, they argued for the first time in months. His words were sharp, careless, and filled with frustration. He complained about responsibilities, about feeling trapped, about a life that was not what he wanted anymore. She listened in silence, tears running down her face, her hands shaking. She realized then that the man she married was slipping away, if he had not already left. She did not sleep that night. She sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. Memories of her father filled her mind, his calm voice, his steady presence, the way he always seemed prepared for things she did not understand. She wondered if he had known this moment would come, if he had seen the cracks forming in her life. In the morning, she made a decision. She would attend the meeting mentioned in the letter, even if she did not understand it. She owed it to her father to find out what he had left behind. More than that, she owed it to herself and her child to face whatever truth waited ahead. As she prepared to leave, her husband barely noticed. He sat on the couch, scrolling through his phone, his mind somewhere else. She paused at the door, hoping he would say something. Anything. He did not. She stepped outside, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. The sky was cloudy, the air cool. She took a deep breath and placed her hand on her belly once more. She did not know it yet, but this was the first step toward a truth that would change everything. Her quiet life, built on hidden truths, was already beginning to break apart. The days after the letter arrived felt heavier than before. Time moved slowly, as if every hour carried more weight than the last. She kept thinking about the meeting mentioned in the envelope, replaying the words in her mind, trying to understand what they meant. Her father had never spoken about business, lawyers, or legal matters. The idea that something important was left unfinished made her uneasy. Her husband grew colder with each passing day. He no longer pretended to care. When he spoke, his tone was sharp and impatient. Meals were eaten in silence, and sometimes he did not come home at all. She stopped asking where he went because she already knew the answer in her heart. Still, knowing and accepting were two very different things. One evening, she sat alone at the small dining table, staring at a plate of food that had gone cold. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from him, short and careless, saying he would not be coming home. No explanation, no apology. She felt a tight pain in her chest, but forced herself to breathe slowly. Her hand moved to her belly, and she whispered softly, telling her child everything would be okay, even though she was not sure she believed it. The next morning, she went to the office mentioned in the letter. The building stood tall among others, made of glass and steel, looking out of place compared to her simple life. She hesitated at the entrance, feeling small and unsure, then stepped inside. The people there spoke politely but formally, calling her by her full name, offering her a seat, and asking gentle questions about her father. They did not explain much that day. They only confirmed that her father had planned everything carefully and that more details would be shared soon. She left with more questions than answers, her mind spinning with confusion. She wondered why such an important place would be connected to a man who lived so quietly. When she returned home, her husband was there, packing his things. Clothes were scattered across the bed, drawers left open. For a moment, she stood frozen in the doorway, unable to speak. He did not look surprised to see her. In fact, he looked relieved, as if this moment had been waiting for her. He told her he was leaving. His words were calm, almost rehearsed. He said he had found someone who understood him better, someone who made him feel free. He complained about responsibility, about being tied down, about a life that no longer excited him. He did not mention love. He did not mention the baby. She asked him why, her voice trembling. He avoided her eyes and said he could not live this way anymore. When she begged him to think about the child, his expression hardened. He said she would manage on her own, just like she always did. Those words cut deeper than any insult. He left that same day, taking his bags, his promises with him. The door closed quietly behind him, but the sound echoed in her heart. She slid down to the floor, holding her stomach, tears falling freely now. The baby kicked again, reminding her that she was not completely alone. The days that followed were the hardest she had ever known. She struggled to sleep, to eat, to focus. Bills piled up on the table. The future felt uncertain and frightening. She wondered how she would raise a child alone, how she would survive without support. Still, she forced herself to get up every morning, driven by a growing sense of responsibility. One afternoon, She received another call, this time from someone connected to her father's affairs. The voice was respectful and serious. They asked her to come back to the office, saying there were important matters that could no longer wait. Her hands shook as she ended the call. She felt a strange mix of fear and curiosity. Before the meeting, she learned something unexpected. A neighbor mentioned seeing her husband with another woman long before he left. The truth, painful as it was, brought a sense of clarity. His departure was not sudden. It had been planned. She stopped blaming herself and began to see his actions for what they were. At the second meeting, the people there spoke more openly. They explained that her father had left behind instructions meant to protect her, especially during difficult times. They spoke of trusts, documents, and responsibilities she was not ready to fully understand. She listened quietly, feeling overwhelmed but also strangely grounded. She left the building that day with a folder in her hands and a new awareness in her heart. Her father had not been as simple as she believed, but his intentions had always been clear. Everything he did was for her safety and future. That evening, she returned to an empty home. The silence was deep, but it no longer felt as frightening as before. She sat on the couch, resting her hands on her belly, and took a long breath. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew one thing for sure. She would not let abandonment define her story. Outside, the city lights began to glow as night fell. She watched them from the window, feeling tired but stronger than she had been days ago. Somewhere ahead, answers were waiting. Her life was changing, whether she was ready or not, and this time, she would face it head-on. She did not expect the third meeting to change her life, but it did. When she entered the tall glass building again, the staff greeted her with even more respect than before. This time, she was guided to a larger room on the top floor. The walls were lined with quiet art pieces, and the windows showed the entire city below. It felt strange to sit in such a powerful place while her own life felt so uncertain. An older man with calm eyes sat across from her. His voice was gentle, but every word carried weight. He began by saying her father had prepared for this day many years ago. He explained that her father was not just a simple man with small savings. He was a founder of multiple global companies, many of which operated quietly under different names. Very few people knew he was the true owner. At first, she thought there had been a mistake. She almost laughed from disbelief. Her father? The man who fixed his own shoes instead of buying new ones? The man who counted coins carefully at the grocery store? It did not make sense. The older man slid several documents toward her. They showed numbers so large she could barely process them. Properties in different countries. Investments across industries. Shares in companies she had only heard about in the news. Her father had built an empire silently, keeping his identity hidden from the public. Her breathing became uneven. She held the edge of the table to steady herself. The baby moved again, as if reacting to her racing heartbeat. She closed her eyes for a moment, tried to understand how the man who lived so simply could have lived such a double life. The older man explained why. Her father believed that money changes people. He wanted his daughter to grow up with values, not greed. He wanted her to marry someone who loved her for who she was, not for what she owned. So he stayed quiet. He watched. He waited. Tears filled her eyes, but they were not only from shock. They were from realization. Her father had protected her in ways she never understood. Even after his death, he was still protecting her. The truth continued to unfold. Every company, every property, every account had been legally transferred to her name. She was now the sole heir to a fortune so large it could influence entire industries. Yet sitting there, she did not feel powerful. She felt small, overwhelmed, and deeply emotional. She thought about her husband. If he had known, would he have stayed? Or would his greed have shown even earlier? The painful truth settled inside her. The man who walked away believed she had nothing. He chose someone else because he thought her life was ordinary and limited. He never saw her true worth, and now he never would. The meeting lasted hours. Lawyers explained responsibilities, security measures, and future decisions she would need to make. They assured her she would not be alone. A professional team had managed everything under her father's instructions, waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth. When she finally stepped outside the building, the world looked different. The same streets, the same cars, the same noise, but everything felt changed. She was carrying more than a child now. She was carrying a legacy. That night, she sat alone in her small living room, surrounded by simple furniture that suddenly felt temporary. She ran her fingers across the old wooden table and remembered her father sitting there during visits, drinking tea quietly. Had he known she would sit here one day, facing this truth alone? She opened one of the folders again. Inside was a personal letter written in her father's handwriting. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. He wrote that he was proud of her strength. He wrote that life would test her heart before it revealed its rewards. He admitted that he kept secrets not to deceive her, but to protect her future. He said true wealth was not money but character, and he trusted that she had both. She pressed the letter to her chest and cried, not out of sadness, but out of love and gratitude. Even in silence, her father had been guiding her path. Over the next few days, her routine slowly began to change. Security advisors checked her home. Financial experts visited to explain systems she would oversee. She moved carefully, still adjusting to the idea that she now controlled resources that could shape many lives. But despite the power around her, her heart remained focused on simple things. She continued to attend doctor appointments alone. She still cooked her own meals. She still folded baby clothes by hand. Wealth had arrived suddenly, but her values remained steady. News of her father's identity had not yet reached the public. The companies continued operating quietly, just as he had planned. The team handling the transition moved carefully, protecting her privacy during this sensitive time. One afternoon, she received an unexpected message from her husband. It was short, asking if they could talk. There was no apology, no warmth, just curiosity hidden between the lines. Perhaps he had heard rumors. Perhaps he sensed something had changed. She stared at the message for a long time before putting her phone down. For the first time, she did not feel desperate for his attention. She did not feel the need to explain herself or beg for his return. A calm strength had begun to grow inside her. The betrayal still hurt, but it no longer controlled her thoughts. She began to see it as part of a larger lesson. Her father had wanted to know who truly loved her without the influence of money. The answer had revealed itself clearly. As weeks passed, she attended more meetings. She listened more than she spoke, observing the people who had worked beside her father for years. Many of them had respected him deeply, not just for his success, but for his fairness. They spoke of his quiet generosity, his habit of helping employees without seeking attention. Hearing these stories made her stand taller. She was not just inheriting money. She was inheriting responsibility and reputation. She promised herself she would lead with the same humility. Late one evening, she stood by the window again, just as she had the night her husband left. But this time, her reflection looked different. Her eyes still carried softness, but there was new determination behind them. She placed both hands on her belly and spoke softly to her unborn child. She promised that this child would grow up knowing love first, not luxury. She promised to teach the same lessons her father had taught her: patience, dignity, and strength. The journey ahead would not be easy. There would be pressure, public attention, and difficult decisions. But she was no longer the woman who waited for someone else to protect her. She was stepping into her father's hidden world, not as a victim of betrayal, but as a guardian of a powerful legacy. The quiet life she once knew was gone. In its place stood a new path filled with responsibility and possibility. And though the world still did not know her name, it would soon feel her presence. For now, she chose silence. She chose preparation. She chose strength. Her father had trusted her with everything, and she would not let that trust be wasted. Change did not happen overnight. It arrived slowly, in small moments that tested her patience and strength. Each morning, she woke early, not because she had to, but because her mind no longer allowed rest. There were decisions waiting, messages to read, and meetings to attend. Yet before all of that, she always began her day the same way, sitting quietly with her hands on her belly, reminding herself why she had to stay steady. She moved into a temporary residence arranged by her father's team, not because she wanted luxury, but because they insisted on safety. The place was calm and well protected, but she kept her habits simple. She made her own tea, arranged her own space, and kept the same routines that had grounded her before. Wealth surrounded her now, but she refused to let it define her. Her days filled with learning. She listened carefully as advisors explained systems, structures, and responsibilities. She asked questions when she did not understand and admitted when she felt overwhelmed. Some expected arrogance or entitlement. Instead, they found humility and focus. Slowly, respect replaced curiosity. She began to understand the size of her father's influence. His companies provided jobs to thousands of people. Entire families depended on decisions he once made quietly from the background. The weight of that knowledge pressed heavily on her heart. She realized that every choice she would make could affect lives far beyond her own. Rather than hiding behind others, she chose to prepare herself. She spent long hours reading reports, reviewing past decisions, and learning how her father had handled crises. He never chased attention. He solved problems calmly and fairly. That approach became her guide. Her pregnancy advanced, and with it came exhaustion and moments of doubt. Some days, she felt too tired to continue. On those days, she allowed herself rest without guilt. Strength, she learned, also meant knowing when to pause. News began to travel quietly through business circles. People noticed changes in leadership patterns, subtle shifts in direction. Whispers spread about the new guardian behind the empire. Still, her name remained protected, just as her father had planned. One afternoon, she attended a meeting where several senior figures questioned her decisions. Their tone was polite, but skeptical. They wondered if she could balance motherhood with responsibility. She listened without anger. When she spoke, her voice was calm and firm. She reminded them that her father had trusted her for a reason, and that responsibility did not disappear with pregnancy. The room grew quiet. For the first time, they saw not a grieving daughter or abandoned wife, but a leader in her own right. Outside of work, her personal life continued to shift. Her husband's messages became more frequent. They carried confusion now instead of confidence. He asked how she was doing, whether the baby was healthy, whether they could meet. She did not reply. Silence was not punishment. It was protection. She focused instead on preparing for her child. She chose simple clothes, soft blankets, and quiet colors. She wanted her child to feel warmth, not pressure. Even with endless resources available, she selected only what felt necessary. One evening, while reviewing documents, she came across a record of charitable efforts her father had supported in secret. Schools rebuilt, hospitals funded, families helped quietly. He never attached his name to these actions. Reading through them filled her with pride and responsibility. She decided to continue that path. Without announcements or attention, she approved projects that aligned with those values. She did not do it to be praised. She did it because it felt right. As her influence grew, so did the contrast between her present and her past. She thought back to nights when she worried about bills and felt abandoned. Those memories did not make her bitter. They made her careful. She understood how fragile stability could be. Late one night, she finally responded to her husband. Her message was short and calm. She told him she was focused on her child and her future, and that revisiting the past would not change what had already happened. She wished him clarity and asked for distance. His reply came quickly, filled with regret and excuses. She read it once, then placed her phone face down. The chapter had closed. Her body grew heavier as the due date approached. Doctors advised rest, and she listened. She delegated tasks and trusted the people her father had chosen carefully. Learning to trust others was another lesson she had to accept. In quiet moments, she talked to her unborn child about life, about kindness, about choices. She spoke about a grandfather who believed in silence over noise and integrity over appearance. She wanted those lessons to live on. The media still had no clear story. Rumors existed, but facts did not. She remained protected, watching the world from a distance while preparing for a future that would soon demand her presence. Standing by the window one evening, she realized how far she had come. She was no longer waiting for rescue or validation. She had become her own foundation. The road ahead would bring exposure, judgment, and challenges she could not yet imagine, but she felt ready. Not because she knew everything, but because she trusted herself to learn. As night settled over the city, she turned off the lights and rested her hands on her belly once more. Change was no longer something happening to her. It was something she was shaping. And soon, with the birth of her child, the world would see the strength she'd been quietly building all along. The night her child was born, the city was quiet. Rain tapped softly against the hospital windows, and the lights inside the room were dim. She held onto the edge of the bed, breathing slowly, focusing on the steady voice of the nurse guiding her through each moment. Pain came in waves, strong and demanding, but she did not panic. She had faced heartbreak, betrayal, and shocking truths. She could face this too. When she finally heard her baby cry, something inside her shifted forever. The sound was small but powerful. Tears streamed down her face as they placed the baby gently in her arms. In that moment, titles, wealth, business meetings, and past wounds all faded. She was simply a mother holding her child for the first time. She looked down at the tiny face and whispered a promise. No matter how big the world became around them, she would keep life simple at heart. She would protect this child not only with money, but with love, wisdom, and strength. The days after birth were calm. She stayed away from meetings and reports, focusing only on healing and bonding. Late at night, when the baby slept against her chest, she often thought about her father. She wished he could see this moment. She believed he somehow already knew. News finally began to spread publicly a few weeks later. Reports confirmed that the quiet founder of several global companies had passed away and left his entire empire to his only daughter. Her name appeared in headlines for the first time. Photos of her leaving private meetings surfaced. Analysts discussed her future decisions. The world was curious. She expected fear when that moment came. Instead, she felt calm. The truth was no longer hidden. There was no need to pretend anymore. Her team arranged a carefully planned public appearance. It was not grand or dramatic. She simply stood before cameras and spoke clearly. She thanked those who had worked beside her father. She promised stability, responsibility, and growth. She spoke about values more than profits. Her words were steady and sincere. Many expected someone flashy or arrogant. Instead, they saw a composed young mother who carried both softness and quiet authority. Public opinion shifted quickly. Respect began to replace doubt. Not long after the announcement, her former husband appeared again. This time, he did not send a short message. He requested a formal meeting. His tone had changed completely. There was regret in his voice and nervousness in his posture when he arrived. They met in a simple office room. She chose not to make the setting intimidating. She did not need to. Her presence alone had changed. He spoke first. He said he had made a mistake. He said he had been confused, pressured, and lost. He claimed he never stopped caring. His words were smoother now, carefully chosen. She listened quietly, just as she had learned to do in business meetings. When he finished, she took a slow breath. She told him she had once begged for partnership, for loyalty, for shared responsibility. She reminded him that when she needed support the most, he walked away without hesitation. She explained that forgiveness and trust are not the same thing. Her voice did not shake. There was no anger in her tone, only clarity. She told him she wished him peace in his life, but their paths would remain separate. Her focus was her child and the responsibilities she carried. The door that had closed months ago would not reopen. For a moment, he seemed ready to argue. Then he saw something in her eyes he had never noticed before. It was strength that did not depend on him. It was independence he could not influence. He left quietly. After that day, she felt lighter, not because of revenge or victory, but because she had chosen herself without guilt. As months passed, she stepped more fully into leadership. She introduced programs that supported working parents within her companies. She expanded the quiet charitable efforts her father had started, focusing on education and healthcare. She made decisions carefully, never rushing for applause. At home, she remained the same. She woke up from midnight feedings. She sang soft songs in a voice only her child heard. She read simple stories aloud, even though the baby could not yet understand the words. Sometimes, late at night, she would sit by the window holding her child and looking at the city lights. She remembered the night her husband left, when she felt alone and frightened. She almost smiled at the memory, not because it was easy, but because she survived it. She realized something important. Her father's greatest gift was not money. It was time. Time to discover who truly stood beside her. Time to grow without the pressure of wealth. Time to learn resilience before responsibility. When her child grew old enough to ask about their grandfather, she told stories of a quiet man who valued honesty more than attention. She did not focus on numbers or power. She focused on character. Years later, people would describe her as a strong leader and a devoted mother. They would talk about the empire she managed and the influence she carried. But those who knew her closely understood something deeper. They knew she never allowed success to harden her heart. On the anniversary of her father's passing, she visited his resting place with her child. She placed simple flowers beside his name and stood silently for a while. The wind was gentle that day. She whispered a quiet thank you, not for the fortune, but for the lessons. As she walked away, holding her child's hand, she felt complete. The journey that began with loss and betrayal had led her to strength and clarity. She had faced heartbreak without losing kindness. She had gained power without losing humility. Her life was no longer a quiet secret. It was a story of resilience. And as she stepped forward into the future, she carried both the past and the promise of tomorrow with steady confidence. She was no longer defined by who left. She was defined by who she became.